Hello, everybody. Okay, we're going to get started here in just a minute. My name is Kristi Hudson, and I am your webinar host. So happy Tuesday. I also happen to be your presenter for today. If you have trouble with any of the audio or video, you can hit the reconnect button at the top of the screen, and that will help you to get reconnected. Just know that if you're connected via Wi-Fi, that can have an impact on the audio and video quality of what you're able to see and hear on the webinar series. Let's see. You can click on Files to download the handouts. For today's presentation, I will do Q&A at the end, but I'm probably going to hide it while we're in here, just so I don't get distracted, because y'all know my ADD is going to kick in, and hopefully no tornado sirens or crashing hail, as it is our tornado season. So rest assured that we should be able to stick with it. I think the weather's holding off for a couple of hours. So again, my name is Kristi Hudson, and we're going to be talking about what to do with patient sexual harassment. And how I ended up teaching this last year was my very dear friend, Dr. Cindy Howard, was doing a sex panel for the Florida Chiropractic Association. And there were multiple doctors who were sitting on the panel. They started it last year in Panama City, I believe. And after the first one, they decided they needed to add some additional information from a business aspect on policies addressing some of the issues they were talking about. And so Cindy asked me if I could do her a favor. This is literally what she said. She says, Kristi, can you do me a favor? And of course, I'm like, absolutely, I would love to. And then she said, we want you to be on the sex panel. And I said, no. And 15 minutes later, I got a speaker contract to participate in the sex panel. And I started doing research. And that is when I learned about the issue of sexual harassment, especially in healthcare, and how it has been under addressed for decades. It only really came to light where it started being addressed in the wake of the Me Too movement. And I was really shocked and surprised by some of the statistics that I read about. Now, obviously, I teach ethics classes for chiropractic state associations, some sexual harassment classes, and all of those classes always start out with, don't sexually harass your team and don't sexually harass your patients. But nobody ever talks about what we're supposed to do in a situation where patients are harassing your team or you in the practice. And I will say that I did this for the first time in Miami last year, and in the many events that I've done it since, I am mind blown with some of the stories that people have shared with me around the country, the phone calls that I've received from different providers and CAs, CTAs to share their stories with me, in hopes that by telling me that story and letting me share that story with others around the country, that we can help all people or everyone working in healthcare to address this situation. So, healthcare's worst kept secret. A 2018 Medscape study surveyed 6,200 healthcare providers and found that 27% of doctors had been sexually harassed by patients. In 1993, researchers in the New England Journal of Medicine reported that up to 75% of female doctors were sexually harassed by patients. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these statistics just address doctors in healthcare, not everyone else who works in healthcare as well. A 2014 study published on the sexual victimization of men, finding that men were much more likely to be the victims of sexual abuse than what was originally thought. The common one-dimensional stereotype of women as victims reinforces outdated gender stereotypes. The assumption that men are always perpetrators and never victims reinforces unhealthy ideas about men. And these stereotypes are all too often make male victims feel too embarrassed to report. And I just can't even stress to y'all enough the number of male providers that have come up to me after events and have shared stories and situations that have happened in their practice that would blow your mind. I'm going to share some of them throughout the day, but or throughout the presentation. And often, in almost every case, I was the first person they had ever shared this story with. They had never told their colleagues, never told their teams about the situation. I had never reported it to anybody. And many times they hadn't even told their spouses. One story that a provider shared with me the first time that I spoke about it was he had a patient that would flirt with him and ask him out all the time. And he just politely declined. And, he kind of laughed it off like it was not a big deal because he didn't want to embarrass the patient in any way. And one night he happened to be staying late working on some paperwork and documentation, and they parked on the back side of the building, not in front of the building, but the back side. So he was the last person to leave about an hour after everybody else had left. And he goes out the back door, and this patient who has been flirting with him and saying inappropriate things to him for months is leaned up against his car waiting for him to walk out. Now, he's made it very clear. Obviously his office has pictures of him and his wife and his family everywhere, and he's made it clear that he's married. But she is standing out there and been waiting for him to come out. And he, asked her to leave, and she refuses to leave. So he kind of backs back into the building, and he ends up calling his wife because he doesn't know what to do. She wanted him to call the police because this is a form of stalking, to have them remove her. Well, he didn't want to upset the patient or offend her in any way. So after about 30 minutes, when the patient still won't leave and he can't get out of the building, his wife finally pulls up on the front of the building. He jumps in her car and they go home. And then the next day, obviously she's not there, so he's able to take his car home. But this just goes to show some of the extreme circumstances that some doctors and team members find themselves in when they're being harassed by patients. Of harassment incidences in healthcare, 50% were initiated by patients and their families. So sometimes it's not even the patient. Sometimes it's a family member or a caretaker that's bringing them into the office, makes inappropriate comments. And we're going to talk about what that looks like, but it's grossly underreported in healthcare. And when polled why they did not report these issues, 40% did not think it would be impactful. And a large part of that had to do with healthcare facilities, small and large, just did not have a good policy in place or good way to report and address these issues. 21% felt ashamed or embarrassed, and 21% stated that they did not have time. Now, that shame and embarrassment, I am surprised it's only 21% and not more than that, because in almost every instance of the so many cases that I've heard over the last year, everybody expressed shame and embarrassment about what happened. And it's really important that when you're talking about this with your team, that you address that issue. They have nothing to feel ashamed about. They have nothing to be embarrassed about. And they have a responsibility to protect not just themselves, but everyone in the practice by reporting these issues. So what constitutes sexual abuse or harassment? Unwanted sexual text messages or emails, and I've heard so many cases of this. A lot of times a doctor's cell phone number will be listed as the emergency after hours number at a practice, and I strongly recommend getting some kind of call service or something, or some type of app or provider that has your actual phone number so that you don't inadvertently give those to patients. Comments about anatomy or body parts, propositions to engage in sexual activity, being asked repeatedly for a date. This is one of the most common ones that I've heard. Unwanted hugging, groping, or any other type of physical contact. Now, this one seems really prevalent within chiropractic. And I think in large part it has to deal with the fact that we're very hands-on within the profession. The whole chiropractic manipulation in many cases is done with your hands, and you're physically touching a patient quite a bit. Even in therapies, there's physical touch of some kind. And really anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. So in the poll, the green line is going to be female. The blue line is male. And this is the percentage of what they reported acted in an overtly sexual manner towards you. Well, it was 19% of women reported that and 16% in men. Asked you out on a date. That was 14% of women had been asked out on a date, 7% men. Tried to touch, grope, or rub against you. 9% happened to women. 6% men. Asked you for a sexual encounter. That was like tied for, it was right at 2% of this, of those 6,000 that had been polled. Sent you sexual emails or letters, or gave you provocative photos of themselves. And again, that one was pretty even at 2%. Accused you of making a pass at them or asking for sexual activity, which was around 1%. Now, in my conversations with many chiropractors and their team members, one of the things that really was consistent was that many of them felt like, one, they didn't know what to do in these situations, how to handle it, or how to address it with a patient, letting them know that it was, inappropriate, unprofessional, and that they couldn't do that. But a lot of it came from fear of retaliation from the patient, where the patient is harassing the doctor, and the doctor felt that if they addressed the situation and became very firm in stating that it was inappropriate, that the patient would file like a false allegations of the doctor sexually harassing them with the board of examiners or with local law enforcement. And they were really terrified of retaliation. So we cannot let fear allow anyone to continually be harassed. The first sign of inappropriate behavior is when a patient's actions or conversation makes you or your team uncomfortable. Patients who make inappropriate comments will first test the waters by making inappropriate jokes or mild comments to gauge your response. If you dismiss the comment, the patient will likely continue with the inappropriate conversation or with inappropriate actions. So you cannot let it go, like laugh it off, pretend like you didn't hear it. The minute something inappropriate happens, you have to address it. But the bigger question is, what are you going to do in that situation? And you have to have a ready reply. We don't tolerate that kind of speech here, or let's keep it professional. I'm leaving because I don't feel comfortable, or pretty standard lines. It also allows you to call out the objectionable behavior, set very clear limits with your patient about what you will and won't tolerate, and seamlessly move to the task at hand, which is treating the patient. You have to be firm. Use plain language, no arguments, no apologizing, no negotiating, just be firm. And again, in those situations, if you think about it, your blood pressure is up, your heart is racing, you're very uncomfortable, you might be scared. And the easiest way to address this is for you and your team to practice. And I strongly recommend and encourage you to make this the focus of an upcoming team meeting. The more you address this situation, the more upfront you are with your team, the more comfortable they will be in coming to you when there is an issue in the practice. It also helps you to become more comfortable with establishing those boundaries and practicing that ready reply so that it becomes instinctual. So as soon as it happens, you can say, I'm sorry, but we don't tolerate that kind of speech, behavior, talk here. Let's keep it professional. Or to say, I'm sorry, that is unacceptable behavior. Please don't touch me. Just role play different scenarios. And I think you might find that the more you talk about it, your team will start to talk about situations, or other providers in your office may even bring up situations that have happened that have made them feel uncomfortable. So I love this little chart, and it says, do you feel safe? And what do you do? Like, this is step by step. And this is in those handouts that you can download and file. Do you feel safe? Yes, clearly and firmly ask the patient to stop the behavior. If you still feel safe and the patient stops and the provider or team member still feels safe, you can continue with care. If not, find a way out of the room and ask for help from a team member or supervisor. Now, I'm a firm believer that nobody should ever go into a treatment room alone. There's safety in numbers. I always think that male or female, it does not matter. Everybody should have a buddy. Everybody should have a CA that's accompanying them into the treatment room. And if I get it that not every office has adequate team members to be able to do that. Some days you're short staffed, but whatever you have to do to make yourself feel safe. But in a situation like this, where somebody has said or made an inappropriate comment, you can back out of the room, get a team member, and then go back in there to treat the patient. You want to make sure that you document what happened and give it to the practice owner or practice manager. And you need to have a protocol in your office for how you handle these situations. And there doesn't need to be any confusion. If you're the practice owner and you're a larger practice that does have a practice manager, have a protocol for who they need to go to in that situation. If you're a smaller practice where it's like you're the practice owner and the doctor and you have 3 or 4 team members, then the protocol is they come directly to you to talk about what happened. And you want to document what happened in writing. And then if this continues, we're going to talk about the steps for addressing this. If the behavior does not improve, you want to consider dismissing the patient and place a warning about potential harassment in the patient's chart, which is visible only to other providers. So how do we document harassment? And why does it need to be documented? I'm a big believer in everything needs to be in writing. The reason you should document the harassment is straightforward. Whether you're the target or if you're somebody who saw what happened, you need a log of the details in the patient's file in your office, so that just in case a patient retaliates, you have the documentation where you documented everything that happened, who was present, what was said. You want to make notes and be very specific. Instead of writing down that someone made an offensive comment, you want to write down exactly what was said. If somebody touched you inappropriately, you're going to document exactly what happened. And you want to also note exactly where the incident took place. So it took place in exam room B during their weekly appointment on April 5th at 1:34 p.m. The documentation of the harassment should be given to the practice owner and a copy placed in the patient's file. And again, there should be no, you got to leave all emotion out of it. It's just very matter of fact. We're stating the facts. This is what happened. This is where it took place. This is when it happened. This is who was present. Now, in the case where you have team members that are getting inappropriate text messages, emails, they're making inappropriate comments on social posts, or direct messaging your practice with inappropriate comments. Maybe they even found their personal social media pages. You want to make sure that you print those off and include that in the documentation, just to show the harassment that's taking place, even outside of the office. So you want to make sure you address a problem immediately by documenting the incident and putting it in writing. The sooner, the better. I get it. Busy practices. If this happens at 8 o'clock in the morning and you have like back-to-back patients coming in the office, a new patient thrown in there before lunch, be short-staffed and have the person where that incident took place go in and document it, even if it's a quick note to themselves and they're going to type it up more neatly, but have them document it as quickly as possible while everything is still fresh in their mind. As the practice owner, if this incident has taken place with one of your team members, one of your associate doctors, you're going to want to meet with the patient to discuss the incident and let them know that it has been reported to you, that you know that they made this offensive comment, that they touched somebody inappropriately, that they continually ask them out on dates, that this is a professional establishment, and that you're letting them know that this behavior will not be tolerated going forward if they would like to continue to be a patient in your practice. More often than not, once you address the situation with the patient and you tell them to stop, it stops immediately. Then if the behavior does not stop, you want to begin the steps to dismiss the patient. So depending on where you live, you need to know the laws in your state. You can check with your state board of examiners, reach out to your state association. They're an invaluable resource. You'll hear me say this week after week after week. But reach out to your state association to get some guidance from them as well, because you want to make sure that every step you take is legal and compliant and following the rules and regulations. You also want to contact your malpractice carrier when you plan to dismiss a patient. Like NCMIC has a patient termination letter like ready to go for their policyholders. So all you have to do is call them and let them know that you're going through this situation. You've reached out to your state association board of examiners. You know what steps you need to take to dismiss the patient, and you want a copy of this letter. So, and I'm sure all malpractice carriers probably have something like that, but this is a resource if you're an NCMIC customer that you can request directly from them by calling the customer service number. When you send that dismissal letter, you're going to send it certified return receipt. You're going to place a copy of the letter and the proof of delivery in the patient's file. So you want to be decisive in how you address sexual harassment in your practice. First of all, everybody needs to reassess any policies. Most practices have some sort of sexual harassment policy in their handbook and part of their policies and procedures. In most cases, it addresses not harassing patients or each other. So you want to address and make sure that you have a policy about what to do in a situation where you're being harassed by a patient, a third-party vendor, anybody, what to do when y'all are, and make sure that that you've gone over this thoroughly with your team and that they know what to do in those situations. Who do they report it to? How is it documented? How will it be handled? They need to feel confident that you're protecting their best interests and that you're going to make them feel safe. What are your incident response protocols? Your goals prevent all instances of sexual harassment, discrimination, and any other misconduct in your practice. Experience shows that completely eradicating this behavior is completely unrealistic. We have people whose behavior we cannot control coming into your offices every single day. We can't control what they do, but what we can do is control how we will handle these situations as they arise. Make sure your team knows that they have the support of the leadership within the office. Y'all set the tone of what is considered the tolerable in the office. Have strong leadership support on policies and initiatives that seek to prevent sexual harassment is essential to the success. Because if you're tolerant of things that make other people uncomfortable, they're less likely to come forward and tell you when there's a situation. You want to engage your employees and team members in efforts to prevent sexual harassment, just to make sure that you have a very strong anti-harassment strategy in your practice. Again, that starts with reviewing your policies, discussing your incident response protocols, practicing what to do in these situations, and letting them know that you're here to support them and help them and protect them, and that you're looking out for their best interest, and they can always come to you with these situations. Every healthcare organization, big or small, needs to promote a clear, comprehensive policy that conveys a firm commitment to safety, respect, inclusion, and equality. It should contain guidelines for policy with a policy statement, prohibited behavior, how employees should be reporting sexual harassment, practice responses to offensive or abusive behavior, discrimination and retaliation, and consequences for violating this policy. In addition, secure methods of reporting harassment should be readily available to employees. Obviously, again, one of the biggest issues that we talked about earlier was shame and embarrassment on the part of the victims, that they didn't really want to report it because they were so embarrassed. So we don't want to make a huge deal out of it. We don't want to tell everybody in the practice. They need a confidential way to report this issue. I love this. This is one of the things I found while I was doing research about erasing harassment from your practice. And it has to do with training and helping your team. Expect. With more than 1 in 4 healthcare providers reporting patient-initiated sexual harassment, it's important for you and your team to expect that this type of behavior will happen and come up with a plan for protection. Watch where you stand, come up with a way to signal for help, or bring someone into the room with you. Think about your treatment rooms and how they're set up. Where are the tables placed in treatment rooms? Are you setting it up so that you're putting the patient between you and the door? If you have to role play and practice these things, maybe make some adjustments in your treatment room, you want to make sure that you and your team have an easy and quick way to safely get out of the room in a very uncomfortable situation. Recognize, check in with yourself, and pay attention to how patients treat your team. Does the encounter feel innocent, and does the patient seem to be making an attempt at small talk, or does it feel icky and uncomfortable? If you see something that doesn't feel right with you, say something. So if you observe something, but it did not get reported, open up the dialogue and say, Susan, I happen to know that when the patient Smith was in the office today, they made this comment. Did that make you feel uncomfortable? And if it did, then let's talk about why it wasn't reported and how we address it with the patient going forward. Like, how do we put an end to that? How do we establish boundaries and say, I'm sorry, that's unprofessional. We don't talk like that here. And what to do in that situation. Address. Come up with a script so you're able to address the mistreatment when it happens. If you set boundaries early, you may be able to avoid the incident from escalating. Practice, practice, practice. This is just as important as practicing the scripts for answering the phone and having patient conversations. It's just another form of a patient conversation, and everyone needs to feel comfortable. Support. Check in with your teams when you see misbehavior. Make them feel comfortable sharing those incidents with you. Y'all, I have this young lady that I met through somebody attending my class. They were classmates in Chiro College. She's been out for about a year. The first time she was sexually harassed by a patient was in the student clinic. She didn't report it. And in fact, she continued to treat this patient off and on in the student clinic and was sexually harassed. And it went beyond just making inappropriate comments. It started off with inappropriate comments and asking her out on a date. And then it would be accidentally touching her inappropriately while they were being adjusted. Never reported it. Then she starts working in a practice, a very large practice. They don't have people who go into the treatment room with the doctors as a rule of thumb. So she's been sexually harassed for almost a year by a patient, and it has become brutal to the point that she actually told her former roommate while they were in chiro school that she was thinking of leaving the chiropractic profession because she just could not tolerate it anymore. It's made her hate her job. So at the recommendation of her friend, she connected us so that we could talk about what had been going on since student clinic. And we talked about it. She was embarrassed and ashamed. She didn't want anybody to think negatively of her because maybe there was something wrong with her. Like she should have been able to tolerate what was going on. And then by the time it had gotten so bad out of hand in the student clinic, she felt like it was too late because she had never reported it. It's never too late to report it. And you've got to stress that to your team. In the current situation at her current employment, she was too embarrassed as a female to go to the male practice owner, which was predominantly male providers in this large practice, to report it. Like somehow that made her weak and inferior. I can't even begin to tell y'all the sheer amount of embarrassment and shame she felt. Like there was something wrong with her because this was the second time this had happened again. But so much so that despite her mounting student loan debt, she was going to leave the profession altogether and get another job. So I talked to her about those incidents. We talked about what she was feeling about. We talked about a script for putting it into it. And then we even role played and scripted out her going to the practice owner and telling him what had been taking place in the practice since she started with this one particular patient. I'm happy to report she is still a chiropractor. And she did talk to the practice owner. It was not as horrible as she thought it was going to be. I mean, he was upset. She was upset. And when I say he was upset that she didn't feel comfortable coming to him. It was a very emotional thing. She now has somebody who goes with her each time she treats a patient. Like everybody has a buddy now. They've addressed sexual harassment to the entire team because here's the bigger issue was this patient had been in the practice a pretty long time. As it turns out, I don't think she was the first provider that he had harassed. It wasn't the first team member that he had harassed. And what was the bigger issue was that nobody had reported it and everybody was tolerating it. So this behavior went on for years. They finally dismissed the patient. The patient's no longer in the practice. So again, be supportive, establish and encourage, develop training for how to handle and prevent patient harassment. And just keep yourself in check. If as you're going through this process, you have your team coming to you and sharing stories about issues with patients and your mind is blown, like, how long has this been going on? And make sure you keep your emotions in check because it's going to feel personal if they start telling you that they've been dealing with something for months or years and never felt comfortable enough to come to you and talk to you about it. Unintentional harassment. Now, this is part of the training too. Now, we have to talk about that there are certain patients that have post-traumatic stress disorder, dementia, traumatic brain injuries, which can explain why some patients say or act inappropriately with touching or behavior. Even these acts of sexual harassment are not intentional. They shouldn't be tolerated. Now, I have a friend who works in a practice that works primarily with people who have brain injuries, post-traumatic stress, things like that. And they do have patients. And they also treat a lot of patients who have severe cases of autism. And some of the tics as a result of that are the patients inappropriately touch themselves, say inappropriate words, make inappropriate comments. And they work with the patient, their caretaker, family members, whoever's coming in with them to help redirect that behavior. Now, the other part of it, we've had some incidents that have been brought to me where employees freak out when a patient has a physical reaction to a form of therapy. So in one case, it was a massage therapy. The patient was in there for low back pain, and there was, she touched the low back. The patient ended up with an erection, and the employee freaked out. And it was a physical response to the area that she was massaging on his low back. Another situation was with E-stem, and I don't know all the details. All I know is that they were doing this therapy. The patient immediately had an erection. The patient was embarrassed. The employee was embarrassed, and they kind of all freaked out. So you want to make sure if you're doing any types of therapy, or again, with massage therapy, it's physical touch. As you know, in some chiropractic adjustments, things like this can happen. You just want to be aware and train your team to know that this is sometimes an unexpected response, that it's not a sexual thing. It's a reaction to therapy or stimuli, and just be aware of it. Because what we don't want to do is, when something like this unintentionally happens, which we're talking about something unintentional, not the unintentional harassment. Well, when you have an unintentional reaction to therapy and they have a reaction, you don't want your team to overreact and make the patient feel worse than they already do. So you want to make sure that you're looking at it from both sides. Like, we don't want to overreact, but we don't want to underreact. We got to find some happy place in the middle, right? And then we have to think about our behavior. Is our behavior appropriate? Now, I don't know how many of you ever used to watch Grey's Anatomy, but if you did, even if you didn't, everybody knows McDreamy and McSteamy. And the reason why I bring this up is because, listen, guys, we all work very closely together. I mean, I've worked with my team. A good chunk of my team and I have been together for 5+ years, even 10+ years. And we're very friendly with each other because, well, that sounded weird, didn't it? I just made that weird. Like, we're like family, right? So you say things to family that you wouldn't necessarily say to your coworkers sometimes, and you make jokes that might be mildly inappropriate. You might say inappropriate jokes because you heard one. It was really funny. I heard it from my grandpa this weekend. Or you have funny nicknames for people. And I will tell you that my chiropractor that I've been going to for 12 years, it's not Dr. Foxworth. But I've been going to my chiropractor for 12 years, and he is a very good looking man. One of my first jobs, actually, because he worked for Dr. Foxworth, one of my first jobs when I came into the practice, no joke. Oh, I should have pulled them out. Where are they? Dadgummit, I didn't think this through. I have a pair of paper shorts, no joke. So one of the first jobs they taught me was when women came into the practice to be adjusted by Dr. C, they had on short skirts, and a lot of them did. I had to make them put on the paper shorts. If they refused to put on the paper shorts, then we'd have to reschedule their appointment because he was not going to go in there and adjust them. And I'd have to double check to make sure that they were on before he would go into the room and treat them. This was legit part of my job. My friends who came to the clinic and got adjusted all around town referred to him as Dr. Hottie. No joke, which I laugh about. I laughed about it with my friends. Was that behavior appropriate? No, it's not appropriate. Like, I shouldn't laugh about it. Now that I'm teaching this, it's Dr. C. Don't sexualize him by calling him Dr. Hottie, because does that take away from, like, he's more than his looks. He's a really great chiropractor. He's a phenomenal chiropractor, actually. So you want to make sure that we're not doing anything by accident, saying things, or just, we want to make sure that we keep our behavior in check. And that of our patients, because you have some patients who've been coming into your practice for 20 years and they feel like family, and they have a joke of the day, and it might be a very racy joke of the day, and y'all all live for it. But you can't let that go on, because again, you got to put an end to that. We want to make sure that we're clearly appropriate across the board. So I told y'all we would talk about some specific stories, and I've shared some of some really crazy ones, but here's a couple of other incidents that people have shared with me over the year. And these are not their pictures. These are fake photos of different people. So you could tell that they came from a male or a female team member or a doctor. A patient made a comment that they would grab my breast if I caused him pain during an adjustment. That is not appropriate behavior. Absolutely isn't appropriate. This provider, actually, I walked into a restroom. This happens to me a lot at events where I go into a restroom and people follow me in there and they either talk to me through the stall door. She did not do that. She waited for me to come out, but she was like right there with two of her friends, and like as soon as I opened the door, they were there and they're like, "Can we talk to you?" And this was one of the stories that they shared with me. Another male provider told me that a patient took off her shirt without being instructed to do so. It was a new patient visit. When he walked in, she was completely topless and sitting on the table, and he had to tell her it was inappropriate. I told her to put her shirt back on. He walked out of the room, gave her a few minutes, but he came back in with a female employee before he would treat her. And that's a great way to handle it. He just, like, you want to make sure too, like, is there confusion? As I know, several doctors have told me stories where patients have been naked or, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. So if it's a new patient, you want to be crystal clear with them when you're letting them in the room, what they're supposed to do. Have a team member let them know what to expect. Like, we don't expect them to get butt naked. Or if you have a gown because you want them to not have anything between, you know, you and their spine, then we tell them how to appropriately put it on, you know, so that you can access what you need to, but be crystal clear. Another one, an older male patient insists on hugging me tightly at the end of each visit. Now, I get a lot of this where patients want to hug you. And the crazy thing is I have friends who are dentists, medical doctors, pediatricians. Their patients don't hug them like they do in chiropractic. Like again, because I think it's very hands-on, and we touch patients that they think it's okay for them to touch you back. So you need to be really clear, like, I'm the provider. It's okay for me to touch you. You cannot touch me. And establish your personal space. This was a CA or CTA. He was getting gifts from patients all the time, inappropriate messages on social media. They would leave him like inappropriate messages and cards at his workstation. They would wait for him in the parking lot. All kinds of crazy stuff was happening. And again, never reported it. He was happily married, just could not believe that people were leaving him these messages. Very cute little guy. So cute. But again, he never established any boundaries, and, you know, and he never reported it to the practice owner. Patients frequently comment on how pretty I am and ask me out on dates. Again, a very common one. So you want to make sure that you establish boundaries and let them know that that is not appropriate ever. So that's the end. So I'm going to go. I see that a couple of people have posted questions in the chat. So we'll talk about those. So once the report is made to the practice manager, what steps should we take in reporting the issue? When should it go to the police? Like, this is a great question. And this is really, like, what are the next steps? So I'm going to go back to that slide. Hold on, because I have this in the, y'all forgive me. This thing is so slow because I'm doing it inside the platform. So once the report is made to the practice manager, here are the next steps. So you want to document the incident on, you know, have a document it on, I say paper, but, you know, like electronic file. You want to document the incident immediately. And you want to make sure that, again, if you're addressing this with a practice manager, it needs to be reported to the practice owner. Like, I cannot express this enough. Like, whether it's you or the practice manager reports it to the owner, they need to know about it. Now, if you went through the process of establishing boundaries and the patient clearly and firmly stops and you're able to continue with care and they don't bring it up again, you just want to document that that's what happened and it didn't happen again. Now, if it happens the second time, you're going to document that again. At that point, they didn't get the message. Like when you said, this is not how we behave. You can't act or talk this way. and they're not respecting the boundaries that you've set in place, that's when I would suggest that you have where the practice owner needs to meet with the patient to let them know that this behavior cannot go on. And then again, at that point, it would be up to the practice owner if and when the patient needs to be dismissed. I mean, if the patient doesn't stop, then I would definitely recommend moving to the part where you're dismissing a patient. Now, a patient physically assaults you, I'd immediately call the police. Like, grabs a hold of you. I mean, but you've got to use your best judgment, and it needs to be part of your practice policy. Like, what will you handle internally? What will you report externally? So there's just so much to it. Now, again, like I said, I've worked with, because a lot of these situations came to me and I had a lot of questions, why everybody was so fearful of reporting, why they wouldn't document it, why they wouldn't address it with the patient, why they felt fearful of dismissing a patient from the practice. So I went straight to the Federation of Chiropractic Licensing Boards. The National Board of Chiropractic Examiners was really great in providing me resources and giving me some guidance. NCMIC was phenomenal in helping me with this process. And like I said, a lot of state associations are bringing this class and a much more in-depth class on sexual harassment policies and procedures to their states, because it's not being addressed. So like I said, reach out to your state association, reach out to your malpractice carrier, because like I said, they're in the process of developing more resources to help guide you in this process. So the next question, I had a new patient who took all of her clothes off, but she didn't put a gown on. When I said she wasn't supposed to take all of her clothes off, I had given instructions before I left the room. She said in her country, everyone took off all their clothes at their appointments. Well, in this case, and we would let them know that in this country, we don't. We don't. I mean, and these are the kinds of things that happen. I mean, I can't even, the number of naked patient stories is mind blowing to me that I've heard, y'all. It never dawned on me that my chiropractor, the thought would never cross my mind that my chiropractor would want me to be naked to get an adjustment. I'm pretty sure I'd be less likely to get an adjustment if I had to get naked to do it. And that's me making light of a situation, but you just have to be firm. I will say, though, that I have seen in doctors' offices, so I'm assuming this happens in healthcare pretty regularly, that even in the treatment rooms, there are signs that say, make sure you have the gown, close to the front, open to the back, or vice versa, where even the instructions are written on the wall. So I'm assuming this does happen more often than we think. So any more questions? I know this is such a deep and heavy topic to talk about, but like I said, it is so very important. I joke and I make light of the fact that, like, when Cindy asked me to do this, I was real quick to say no. Because I couldn't even imagine what in the heck I would talk about when it came to, being on a sex panel. But I have learned so much from this that I can't even tell y'all. It has been the most amazing thing for me to be a part of this. Well, this stupid screen share thing does turn screen share on. Let's see if I can make it work. So, well, since it won't work and y'all are seeing my big hot mess, please ignore this. I'm in the process of home editing my office at home. Bless it. So we have a webinar next week. My dear friend, Rosemary Bachansky. We're going to be talking about creating the ultimate patient experience. Like, I'm super stoked about it. It's just going to be such a fun topic. The following week, we're going to go over the quick guide to accelerated practice growth with Austin Daughtry. And I am really excited about this one too, because he's going to be talking about little things that you can incorporate technology-wise into your practice that will help make you more efficient and help you to grow faster. Which actually, I did write an article about that. It's not coming out until June. And then we're going to have Dr. Marty Kotler come on board to talk about getting paid for lumbar braces, home traction. We're going to be focusing on DME. And then we have a lot of great ones for May as well. Like we have so many good webinars coming up and on a variety of topics. I'm just going to post this here so you can see the full list, but we're going to be talking about what to do for patients with migraines and headaches. Maximizing your chiropractic team for ultimate success. The cash practice. Do you want to have a cash practice? What are the real rules and regulations? Or do you think you have a cash practice and do you really? We're also going to be talking about how to audit yourself the same way that Medicare would with Evan William, which is going to be super fun if y'all follow me on social or Instagram. I posted the best picture today. I just recorded an awesome class on it's a CE class for Kentucky on peer review with Dr. Evan William and Dr. Chris Anderson and Dr. Rachel Went was our moderator. And it was like, why is peer review so important and what to look for in audits when you're self-auditing or auditing for a colleague? It was way more fun than it probably should have been. But it not only is it funny, it was educational. So maybe I should do that panel discussion. We should do that on here. I don't know. What do y'all think? Let me know. So anyway, I want to thank y'all so much for joining me today. We're going to get finished 9 minutes early. You know the rules. If you're not seeing patients for another 10 to 15 minutes, stay in your office, deep breathe, finish your lunch, stretch, just have a moment of peace before you get back at it. I want to thank you so much for all that you do for chiropractic in your communities. Thank you for being a part of our webinar series, and I will see y'all next week, same time, same place. Have an amazing day. Bye, y'all.